All right. Hi, everybody. Today we're going to be talking a bit about this graph. So in your next quiz that you have, you're going to get a couple of questions talking about exercise domains and making sure we want to make sure that you understand the different domains that we have and what's going to be occurring on metabolically, as well as what we'll see physically within each domain. So let me get my laser pointer out here. So quick explanation of the graph of this graph. If you can understand this graph, then almost all exercise domain questions you're going to be completely fine on. First off, on the axes, we have power instead of time. Typically on a graph, you'll see time. So this is not a graded test. This is not intensity getting greater over time. This is this way you see if someone was biking here, let's say they were biking at 60 watts. They might be right here. And here they'd be 200 watts. Up here, they'd be in the 600 watt range. And obviously it's different for each person depending on their maxes and where each of these thresholds lie. For our y-axis, we have a couple things. First thing is this dotted line coming up here. That's going to be our ATP demand. And so when we're performing any kind of power, the more ATP required to do that work, to provide the energy for that work. And that energy can be provided in multiple ways. In this one, we're showing the 3 different ways. Shown here, we've got aerobic metabolism in blue. So that's glycolysis, citric acid cycle, and oxidative phosphorylation through the entire pathway. If it is just anaerobic glycolysis, you'll see that here in yellow. And then there is phosphocreatine in red. We have talked about these different metabolisms in previous units. So if you need a review, I'd suggest going back to those videos or to the book to be able to understand what those sources of ATP are. So looking here at the thresholds that we have 4 thresholds. We have moderate intensity, 4 domains. We have moderate intensity, heavy intensity, severe, and extreme. Now you notice light's not on here, even down to an ATP demand of basically 0. So there really is no light exercise, though that is a common phrase that is used. Light and moderate tend to be very similar, though people might not say or might say that there is a difference. But for the purpose of this class, we're going to say moderate intensity is just one exercise domain by itself. You can see that this is held at any time up to lactate threshold. We've talked again in previous units about lactate threshold. That's going to be that defining threshold on the upper side of the moderate domain. And this is where you're going to see people spend the majority of their day, of their lives in this. Whether they're sitting, walking, maybe up to a very slight jog, just depending on the person's health, where that might sit, but this will generally be where they're at. You also notice that there's still a little bit of glycolysis and phosphocreatine use in this. This is typically, if you go to stand up, your body might recruit a little bit of that, but it's a small sliver, small amount. But that's just kind of a reminder that all 3 are always going at all times. Now, once we pass that lactate threshold, we enter into the heavy domain. In this domain, we are still in a sustainable point. If you remember, critical power is that line of sustainability when it comes to power. So if someone's on a bike and say they have a critical power of 220, if they bike at 219, they can go for hours and hours up until their glucose stores are gone or they fatigue through central fatigue. If they are at 221, just above that line, they are going to fatigue probably within about 20 minutes because they've lost that line of sustainability, or they've gone over that line of sustainability. So looking in the heavy intensity, this is where you're going to see marathon runners and maybe down to a 10 5K, depending on how long it takes you to run it. But this is the domain that you're going to be seeing. Again, the reason that they fatigue here, and if they end up fatiguing in the moderate, are both going to be due to energy stores. In heavy intensity, it's typically going to be due to glucose stores. Moderate intensity, you'll be able to see more fat recruitment as well. And so they'd have to go through all their fat stores before they fatigue. And if you fatigue in the moderate intensity, typically that's just death. You've lost all energy source at that point. But in the heavy intensity, if you're fatiguing here, it's due to the lack of those glucose stores. You'll notice that there is some glycolysis and some phosphocreatine used to meet that ATP demand. Now, these are unsustainable processes to a degree. Now, in this situation, we are not doing enough glycolysis and enough phosphocreatine to call unsustainable. They are producing metabolites that will eventually cause fatigue. However, the body is able, with the small amount that is being produced, it is able to get those metabolites out of there so that the body doesn't end up fatiguing. Then we go to the severe intensity, though. That's crossing that line of sustainability. From this point, we go to a point where we're using more glycolysis and more phosphocreatine, but our body cannot get rid of the metabolites that are being used. Now, I apologize for this only showing flat here. From my understanding, I would love to put this flat all the way across. And the reason is because at any point here running in this domain or biking in this domain, you're going to fatigue at your VO2 max. Your body is going to be able to adapt and to get as much oxygen consumed and down to your muscles as possible so that your aerobic metabolism is going at full cylinders. It's going 100%. And then glycolysis and phosphocreatine are making up that difference there. So an important note, something to really keep in mind is that if you're in the severe intensity, if you're above critical power and below this threshold, which I'll talk about in a second, then you will always reach that VO2 max. Okay. But if you notice that when we jump in the extreme intensity, that aerobic metabolism contribution drops significantly. You get much more glycolysis, much more phosphocreatine until glycolysis starts to drop. Now, the reason behind this is our body has different adaptations to make to be able to achieve that VO2 max or achieve that highest producing aerobic metabolism. Different things include our breath needs to increase, our breathing rate needs to increase, our heart rate needs to get up, our arteries need to dilate, our mitochondria have to be prepared to receive that oxygen and to go through oxidative phosphorylation quick enough. And so during the time that these are building up, if we end up producing too many metabolites through alternate methods, then we will see that fatigue. This is an easy example to see when you're sprinting or doing some heavy lifting. Heavy lifting or weightlifting is going to be in this extreme intensity almost every time, because you're never going to be able to get up to a VO2 max before you fatigue. Think about a single lift. You're doing your 1 rep max. You do 1 lift, you come back down. Are you out of breath? No. Is your heart rate starting to get faster? Yes. Is it at full max heart rate? Probably not. Your arteries are probably going to dilate, but are they at the full capacity? Probably not. But you just did a 1 rep max. You can no longer sustain that power. So in that definition, you fatigued. So through all of this, through the reason that this is dropping, this aerobic metabolism, is because our body cannot adapt. So this line here, I know it says VO2 max. There's not really a good defined threshold for this, but that is that point when your body can no longer will fatigue before it can have time to adapt. Don't worry, you're not going to be tested on this specific threshold. It needs to be defined. It's something that needs a label of some sort. The reason that there isn't one there is because it's not something that's easy to measure. So people are not necessarily trying to take this in to define it, to give it a label, because it's not easy to measure and it's probably not worth measuring in a clinical setting. So just a quick reminder, moderate intensity is going to be kind of easy walking to a very light jog. Heavy intensity will get to a heavier jog, something that you'll see more in marathon runners. Severe intensity, you can see anywhere between a 800 to a mile long race if you're running, or even up to a 5K if you can get that sorry, if you can get that up to like a 20-minute time, then you're going to see people going just above their critical power. So they're fatiguing right at that 20 minutes. Jumping over this threshold, you're going to get into that extreme intensity where you're going to see fatigue quickly. The fatigue in both of these domains are going to be due to metabolites from glycolysis and phosphocreatine. And the only difference between the two is whether you have the time to adapt to your VO2 max before fatiguing. If you have any questions, please let me know. Just send me a quick email. I'll be happy to help you. Have a good day.